How's it going, everyone? Emanuel Class here, and welcome to the very first Fireside Chat. In this chat, I am going to go over some of the things that are behind the scenes for the Monpoc radio show. The Fireside Chats are going to be a little bit of, some time with me and my own Riot Quest radio show, my Monpoc radio show. You get all kinds of different things going on, and it's hard to know what's going on behind the scenes. And so I wanted to give you kind of the director's cut, so to speak. And I'll use these other fireside chats to help you get to know me a little bit better. I tend to interview other people on my radio show, and so you don't get to learn a whole lot about me. And so these fireside chats will be an opportunity for us to have some more one-on-ones. But in the first episode of the Monpoc radio show, I knew I was going to bite off a lot. It was going to be really ambitious, and it was going to kind of pick up in the middle of a story almost. But like any good pilot and any good TV show, I'm going to give you just enough to tease you, and then hopefully you come back for more. And you never know what's going on completely in the first couple episodes of any TV show. It takes a little bit to get some context of where everything's going. And this show in particular, I wanted to take a Lovecraftian story and Power Rangers and Ultraman and Godzilla and just, Gamera and smash them all into like a radio play. And that's difficult because most of those interesting things about that are the actual kaiju fights. And how are you going to listen to kaiju fights? How do I make listening to kaiju fights interesting? And so I had to give you just enough story to keep it going and get you invested in the human elements so that you care why people are fighting and kind of build it around from there. So in the beginning of this book, or in the beginning of this story, there's a book, and Cthulhu was one of the main characters I wanted to write about. And this was difficult because typically in Lovecraft, there is a kind of shadowy figure that just happens to be doing things, this elder in the background. You don't typically see, Cthulhu up close and personal. But that's not what Monpoc's about. Monpoc is about getting to play with all your big monster kaijus. And so I had to make a decision really quickly about how prevalent I wanted these monsters to be in the show. And I wanted Cthulhu to be a main character. I wanted him to be my, Emperor Palpatine, my Darth Sidious. He was the great influencer. And so in scene one, Grand Marshal Ivan is the Grand Marshal in the Zerkalo in my world, and I wanted him to be basically Cthulhu's puppet, or his body that he planned to inhabit, so to speak. And so with that, Grand Marshal Ivan receives a book from a courier, and that book was originally put in a tomb guarded by the Elemental Champions hundreds of years ago, and it was written by Cthulhu. And so when Grand Marshal Ivan opens up this box, it starts to kind of whisper to him, and he's like, "Oh, wait a minute. I'm going to close that. I'm going to have a few drinks, and then I'm going to take another crack at this, because like any good Russian, he needs some yodka before he gets at it." Actually, now knowing our universe, he probably was drinking Zerk Cola, because that's a thing. And he has his drink, and he opens it back up, and the book starts to talk to him, and he hears this voice. And I wanted it to be clear that Cthulhu wasn't in the room. He was a disembodied voice that was coming out of this book, so to speak. And so the voice speaks to him, and he says, "Hey, basically, I'm Cthulhu. I'm a god. You're my puppet. I don't care who you were previously, but I have a mission for you." And one thing that I wanted Cthulhu to do very early on is he plays on a similar motif and pulls from Napoleon in history. Napoleon used to offer titles to his officers that he didn't when he didn't have enough money to pay. He'd offer them patents of nobility for land they hadn't conquered yet to just keep them fighting. And so Cthulhu offers him basically titles in lieu of any kind of real promise of power. And Grand Marshal Ivan bites at it. So in the next scene, we get Incinerus and a guard pilot, and they're on a strike fighter heading over to the Zerkalo territories where this book was delivered to this reclamation facility. And we get a little bit of Incinerus's backstory here and a little bit of kind of the character he is. He's very much that brash, young, flame on, kaiju hero character that you get in like Ultraman or even Power Rangers. The hey, let's go do the thing, gotta do the fighting, he's even sounds like a voiceover character in a lot of ways. And when he has this conversation with his guard pilot, you also get the fact that the guard pilot sees Incinerus as a bit of a celebrity, which kind of leads into Incinerus's ego even more. He's young, he's a superhero, and this guy's literally like, you know what? Just because you're Incinerus, I'm gonna take you on a jet ride to wherever you need to go in enemy territory. Like that's, as a military man, that's some stuff. Like that's breaking a lot of protocol, but he was willing to do it because Incinerus asked him to. And so at the end of the scene, Incinerus jumps out of the plane and right down into Zerkalo territories. But right before that, he tells the pilot, like, this book is made from ancient death magic, and we've been tasked to guard it, and basically, if I don't get it back, the whole world's going to collapse. And so Incinerus halos in and hits like a comet. So the next scene is actually, you can hear it in the background, him, and when he lands, like, there's a record playing, and it skips. Um, then we have a Zerkalo officer enter Grand Marshal Ivan's office and say, Grand Marshal Ivan, the communication towers are down. What are your orders? And Grand Marshal Ivan is so consumed with reading this book with Cthulhu that he didn't even realize anything was going on. He's like, What are these alarms? What are these alarms for? And so the officer, just, keeping it steady, is like, all right, so there's a dude who haloed in, and he's made a fire, and he's basically slagging all of our best pilots. What should we do? And so Grand Marshal Ivan, he doesn't want to be troubled with it. He's like, you know what? Send in Zavad. So one tiny little fire dude, he's like, send in the big robot. And then he's like, you know what? After a minute or two, if he survives, just in case, send out Comcor and Voyaka. So, like, he's tripling down on, like, just get this out of my hair. I've got stuff to do. And so they're like, yep, okay, Zerkalo forever and out. And the next scene after that, we get the interesting fight scene between Zavad and Incinerus. So Incinerus goes in and he's like slagging all of these pilots and all the Verada walkers and tearing down spars. And then Zavad shows up, and Zavad's intro music is very much like a WWE wrestler, and it's taken. So I wanted him to kind of have this like Euro trance feel, and that song was from Super Troopers when the cops pulled over the European couple, and it's like moo wow wow that I was like, yes, this is perfect because Zavad's just gonna be this crazy like raver like Russian dude, and shout out Timothy Black, nailed that character for me. So he comes in playing his music real loud, takes his speaker, and he's like, Intruder, if you don't leave, I'm going to mess you up. And Incinerus, being the superhero he is, goes, obviously you don't know who I am. So he gets real big, turns into big Incinerus, and he's like, I am the custodian of fire, the phoenix, And Zavad just doesn't care. He's just like, boom, and launches a rocket straight through Incinerus' chest, basically knocking him into the building behind him. It just breaks a couple ribs, and this injury haunts Incinerus for like the rest of this whole ordeal. And then Incinerus gets up and he's like, let me show you I'm a hero, what my metal's made out of. And he goes in and he does like a combo set of moves. Flames of the Forge, Nova Uppercut. And I wanted him to kind of feel like that Dota character that you click on and he does his moves and he's kind of darting about and he's like lights the tiles on fire and ignites it. And I also wanted him to feel very kind of like that Power Rangers hero, like I'm going to announce my attacks as I'm doing them. And then he's like, had enough yet. Got to get in the really snippy quip here. And Zavad's like, we're just getting started. And this is kind of a double play here because Incinerus is like, what do you mean we? And by that he means, I've already got started, I'm sweating my ass off, you haven't done anything yet. But it also means, it dawns on him a second later, you can't see it on his face because you can't see his face, but it dawns on him in the audio, oh, there's more of you, aren't there? Because Zavad says, oh, you catch on fast for a Terran, meaning people from his dimension. And Incinerus turns around, and there is Comcor, and there is Voyaka. And so Zavad announces them like two more wrestlers entering the arena. And each of them I gave character names after Russian characters. So Zavad, I named him Borgov after the Russian chess player in Queen's Gambit, just because I thought he was an interesting character. And then I named Comcore Ludmila after the Russian sniper. You can go look her up. She has her own history, and she seemed very precise on her card, so I wanted that to kind of fit into her motif of this femme fatale. And shout out to Kat for nailing that character. And then I wanted Voyaka to kind of be the foil between these two extremes. He's also Zavid's brother, so Yuri is trying to keep Borgov Zavid in check, basically, from being too crazy. While also Ludmila has, aspirations to be the next Grand Marshal, and and Voyaka, for all intents and purposes, wants to help her get there. So there might even be some like love admiration going on between these characters we don't know about yet. But they're basically the Team Rocket of our group, and um, they proceed to just mess Incinerus up real good. And I like to use lots of the rules from the cards. So we get secondary battery, we get focused will, all of these different rules that you can go and once you Google who they are and look at their card, you're like, oh, he's using all the rules from the card for the dialogue. That's because I wanted you to hear them fight and know when they were fighting. And so they launch rockets at Incinerus, and they miss him, but they don't know that. And they're like, did we get him? I think we got him. And then Incinerus, basically launches himself down on top of Zavid, and he's just like, this is when he gets to introduce his like super ability, Pulsar Blast, like his, Kamehameha, so to speak. And then he gets some quippy like, watch your feet, Dr. Robotnik, homage to Sonic the Hedgehog, but also because they're these big rock'em sock'em looking robots. And he's like lighting the tiles on the ground on fire with Ignite and using all his different cool abilities. And then they're like, oh yeah, did you forget there's still only one of you and three of us? Secondary batteries engaged, launch all the rockets, and you get a transition here also between monster turn, which just happened, and then a unit turn now. And Incinerus is by himself, so he's just taking all the monster turns. But they, when she has them all launched, there's a difference because when Comcore and Zavid launch their guns, it sounds like a tank cannon. But when the spars launch on the unit turn, they sound like rockets. And so I wanted you to hear the difference between unit turn and monster turn. And you might not pick up on it right away, but that's what these after hours are for, right? And they just annihilate Incinerus. I guess die in a hail of fire. Not die, but, basically flip into hyper. And so at that point, we cut away and we get to the introduction of two of our guard pilots. We get Defender X and Nova, who are flying around doing patrols over the Isles of Annihilation. When Defender X gets a call from the local guard base, boop, 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 hey, look, Incinerus is getting in a fight downtown. And so he sends it over to Nova, knowing she's closer, and also they have history. And Nova's like, oh no, I need to go help him because she's ESR. She's Emergency Support Rescue. And so Defender X is like, use the tactics we use when fighting against Globicus, divide and conquer. And she says, don't you mean bifurcate and conquer? Further hitting on those rules from the card. And so Defender X is like, you know what, I'm going to go back and I'll get Sky Sentinel and a bunch of strike fighters that are back at the hangar, and you meet me out there. And she's like, great, I linked in with the guard base. They're going to send me some MR tanks and some exo armors, and we're going to go do the thing. And so she swoops in to save Incinerus. And when she swoops in to save him, Incinerus is almost done for at this point, and the two of them have like a moment. But before we get to that, I also want to talk about the funny interaction between the Zerkalo pilot. So at the beginning of it, Zavid is actually complimenting Incinerus, saying, the fact that you survived a second suplex body slam is a testament to your fortitude, a nod to the fact that he's fireproof, and so slamming him into buildings wasn't doing as much damage as Zavid thought it would. And then Voyaka's like, why are you wasting your breath on him? He's about to be dead, but you know what? I bet he's got a snippy comeback, then he's going to waste his last breath on. And we actually see a really interesting judgment call from Comcore here, because she says, I'll take that bet, 5 Zerks, right? And she's the super precise fighter. Why would she take potentially a bet that loses? And that's because she's willing to take calculated risks. She's the one reading all the readouts, knows how much health he has, knows how much damage he can take, and knows he's basically dead. So she doesn't think he's got another snippy comeback in him. And of course, Incinerus, being our hero, could actually be at 0 health and probably still have a snippy comeback with the, I could do this all day, homage to Iron Man. I mean, Captain America, sorry. Um, and so they have this moment, and then Nova flies in, and Incinerus is relieved. Nova, thanks for saving my butt. And she brings the units in, and so they finally, Incinerus and the protectors finally get a unit turn, and the units are lighting them up, boom, launching all their bombs, and the exo armors tear down the reclamation facility, and you think they're having their day. But the robots, I mean, what's one unit turn's worth of damage to a bunch of monsters? And so they actually just go on a murdering spree. Even Zavit starts picking up exo armors and just tossing them. And he even has a song about, oh, it's an exo armor tossing kind of day. And when he does, he actually throws one at Nova. Nova's still full health, but Incinerus gives his last health to dive in front of the exo armor and stop it to save Nova. And just at that moment, they had this exchange, and she's like, hey, I think we've got him right where we want him. And Incinerus is like, I mean, yeah, they're spread out, but we're still really outnumbered. And kind of, hey, you're on your own on this one. I'm about knocked out. And then when he has that moment, she says, no, dummy, look up. Defender X and Sky Sentinel come swooping in to save the day, and they have all of their strike fighters, and they start giving orders, strafe on my order, and they are just blowing everything up, lighting everything up. And so what do our bad guys do? They engage their teleporters because they're transdimensional warriors, and it sounds like the TARDIS, the wheezing TARDIS, with the brakes still on, and they teleport away and get back to base. And when they do, Sky Sentinel seems a little disappointed, but Defender X points out that they still have Incinerus to think about, and he's basically shrunk back down, and now Nova is holding him in the robot hands. So let's take him back. And so that's where our first episode ends, and so ends our first fireside chat. I hope this gives you some more context to the episode and some more understanding in the background of it. And basically, what I wanted to do was start off with a little bit of the Cthulhu, so you understand kind of there's more going on here than meets the eye. Give you Incinerus, and then also introduce you to some of the other, the Guard and the Zerkalo block, who are basically evil Guard, who are some of the main proponents of this story. So I'll give you a little bit more on episode 2 on the next Fireside Chat. Thank you for tuning in.